My name is Russell Medley, and today I'm going to share with you a presentation over Ferpa and all the different components that make up Ferpa as well. So first of all, what is Ferpa? Ferpa stands for the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act. It was established in 1974, and it's basically a way for schools to maintain confidentiality of all personally identifiable information and educational records related to the students. This includes, but is not limited to, health records, progress reports, discipline records, attendance, social security numbers, etc. It is also a requirement that must be met for any schools to receive federal funding. So what can be done under FERPA? It's the rights for parents or those 18 and older to receive a copy of student records. They can also deny access to others. It is also a process to correct any errors that are in student records. There are also opt-out options. This might be for surveys or questionnaires that might be used where students can opt out from taking those if they disclose personal information. This also, there's an opt-out for any military recruitment where they could have access to that record and try and contact them. This is also a process for complaints as well. What FERPA does not do is it does not give rights to sue the school. If there are any issues with it where FERPA feels like is being violated, then those requests need to be put into the government, and then they will kind of touch base with schools and go from there. It is not a confidentiality law. It does not dictate requirements for safeguarding information. The responsibility actually falls on the schools and how information is stored, protected, destroyed, etc. It does not include, what's not included in student record includes teacher notes, records from law enforcement, records on homeschool children, etc. Schools can also not request information about a student's citizenship or immigration status. Who has access to school records and student information? This would include parents, legal guardians, or those who are acting as a legal guardian. This would also be students who are 18 and older. One exception to this would be students who may be 17 but are in college. They would still be able to access their school records and student information. Schools can release directory information, and this would include just like basic information like name, address, etc. They can release that to others if parents do not disclose that they don't want that information shared within a reasonable time. Teachers can share information internally if it's supporting the educational process. It is advised that they're doing their best to not do it in ways that can be accessed by others. So email maybe not always be the best bet. And we'll talk if email is used. We'll talk about encryption. Law enforcement can also have access to student records or student information if the situation is threatening to the health and safety of other student or student groups. Some exceptions would be if Homeland Security can have access to monitor the stay of international students. Usually this is only happening if students like visa is going to run out or something like that. And also if there's any schools that have to turn that information over just as part of compliance with any judicial orders or subpoenas as well. Some issues with FERPA. Obviously, with more technology, apps, and websites that students have access to, there's going to be more chances for data breaches. It's hard for schools, to fully monitor everything, and just with all the new stuff coming out, it makes it that much more challenging. Students generate a lot of sensitive information about themselves, which may not always be protected by law. Something also very important in this is third-party vendors. Third-party vendors may offer free services in exchange for access to student data. Schools are all, obviously are short on funding as it is, and so it's kind of a tough thing to navigate where you can get free services, but then not necessarily always understand how those third-party vendors who are offering those free services are using that student data. It may not be in compliance with FERPA. Schools can actually still be held responsible if those third-party vendors are not using that information the way they should be using them. Surveillance and imaging is also important. 80% of schools have surveillance cameras. 94% are in high schools. They should be in places with low expectations where privacy is expected. The Fourth Amendment prohibits government agencies from conducting unreasonable searches. There should be policies in the handbook and signage that cameras are located throughout school property and that they should anticipate images will be captured. Parents have rights to view images captured of students. Schools should do their best to attempt to only show those pertaining to that particular student. If this cannot be done, then parents are allowed to view the entire source. If law enforcement requests school footage, consent first needs to be given from the parents as well. 8 ways to ensure FERPA compliance. First of all is just to raise awareness, so just understanding the responsibilities as well as consequences. Confirming that FERPA applies to you, and so we talked about how this would be schools that receive federal funding from the Department of Education. knowing the rights, protections, and exceptions. So this is what is in the educational files and who has rights to view those. Making sure that we're choosing compliant vendors, so those who use FERPA, and then making sure we have contracts or agreements in place that show compliance. So talking about how the data will be used, who has access to it, and how that data will be disregarded after that information is no longer needed. Other ways include training all school employees, so just having some yearly training on rights and school responsibilities, implementing compliant policies and procedures, so making sure we're shredding no data, developing a data breach program, and making sure we're trying to prohibit emailing private information. If emails are used, it's really important to try and encrypt files and emails, so just adding that extra layer of protection for school employees. And then implementing other prevention tools. This might include some compliance monitoring tools as well. Finally, we end on some tips for parents and those students who are 18 and older. Most important is just to make sure that you're reading everything that comes home, making sure you're taking time to read the small print where you might be signing off on something and granting access to others to use student information that maybe you didn't know about. So just make sure that you're reading everything and understanding what information is being used. Ask why information about students is requested, and then what do schools deem as directory information. And while most of this is basic stuff, you just want to make sure you fully understand what that includes. And there are always opt-out options if you do not want that information to be disclosed. Make sure you ask for copies on policies. This might also include third-party access, just understanding how they're going to use that information. Making sure we're teaching students to inform you about surveys or questionnaires. And then if you ever feel like there is a breach of security, just making sure that we are documenting that. Those are my references. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.